always, I have the distinct pleasure of introducing my co-founder of ListReports and CEO of ListReports and deep thinker and wizard of all things. And I don't know, I could go on and on, but I'm not going to. So with that, I'm actually going to bring AJ on. So AJ, why don't you say hello to the agentpreneurs of ListReports? You're not new to this.
Hello, agentpreneurs. How are you? And
Awesome.
by the way, Randy, if you'd like to go on, I wouldn't stop you.
That's
If
right. That's
you want
right.
to go on and on,
Maybe
yeah.
we'll dedicate next Monday's episode to me just gushing about you, and
Oh, okay.
not talking about your changing hairstyle from call to call.
Yes. Yeah. Well, we talk about this is a time to experiment with new things, and what I get a kick out of is I've never been in front of more people,
Yes.
because of these shows and the things that we're doing, and this is the time I decide to experiment. So,
It's
anyway,
so true. It's so true.
yeah,
In this
yeah,
case, I think successfully. So I like it. There may be
yeah.
other opinions, but I like it. You're ready to go. It's fantastic.
I'm excited. Yeah.
So, AJ, let's sort of introduce the topic today, right? So we've got
Mm,
this really interesting idea, which I think is kind of provocative fun. I'm just going to pull up this visual. It says finding your superpower. So, AJ, what does that mean, right? What are we
mm.
talking about, and what role has it played for us in this company in particular, and how we've talked about this with our team?
Yeah, well, it's really funny for list reports, the idea of your superpower is kind of a big deal. So it's really embedded in the culture of the company and what we talk about. And so the basic idea behind it is that we are all good at certain things. We are all good at certain things where also our passions overlap with those things. And the more that we focus on those things, the more successful in general we will be. The more that we focus on that feeling that we all have deep inside of ourselves, which is, oh boy, we're really bad at this and this and this and this, and we should focus on those areas and shore them up, the worse off we tend to be, because there's a reason why you're not good at those things, either because you're not passionate about those things or because you're just simply, as is the case in a lot of areas, not talented in terms of where those things exist. And so this idea is, boy, wouldn't it be cool if everybody just focused on the things that they were great at and publicly acknowledged the things that they suck at, and
Yeah.
and they just focused on those things. So that's the idea behind finding your superpower.
And I think for a lot of people listening, it's a little bit counter to either what they've been taught or even at this
Hmm.
point counterintuitive, right? Which is this idea that we should shore up our weaknesses. And what you're saying is the opposite. You're saying double down on your strengths. So, but why is that? Why is focusing on our strengths so much better than trying to shore up our weaknesses?
Well, it's just kind of a law of physics. If you have a ton of inertia in terms of things that you work on that you're simply not good at, and that doesn't mean you can't get better. But life is about competition, and you're competing for resources. You're competing to get ahead. You know, and this is sort of in the Darwinian sense of it, right? But when you focus on the things that are your natural gifts, you know, you tend to soar much more easily than when you try to focus on the things that are your weaknesses and your deficits. And so, an investment of, let's say, 1 unit of energy into something where it's your superpower tends to yield a 10x result. I'm just picking numbers here, but just
Yeah.
for the purposes here. Whereas 1 unit of energy expended on your weaknesses probably yields, in the best case, a 1.5x result, right? And so now the question is, if you could focus on those things that you're truly great at, could you get ahead and overcome the requisite weaknesses that come with that? I mean, imagine if you trained a bird to walk really fast, right? Like, it's silly, right? Like, just on
Yes.
the face of it, it's silly. You should train a bird to be a world-class flyer, right? That's where they're going
Right.
to thrive,
Right.
right? And that's where they're going to succeed. So, put down in a sort of a really ridiculous analogy. That's what I would say.
It's super helpful. So we're actually going to kick this off with a couple quotes that you sent over. So
Hmm.
the first one is from Marilyn Vos Savant, if I'm pronouncing that correctly. It says, "Success is achieved by developing our strengths, not by eliminating our weaknesses." Which you've just covered, and I think that's a great way to encapsulate that. And the second one is actually from the former CEO of the Girl Scouts, who said, "Good leaders make people's strengths effective and their weaknesses irrelevant." And so how do you think about those as we come into sort of your first slide here, really talking about your superpower?
Absolutely. So I think you're doing that, when she says good leaders, but this is really applicable to anybody because we're all leaders in our own lives, whether we're
Yes.
leading a customer to, a transaction or something else, right? So, the idea is to focus on your strengths. Uh, I'm sorry, one second. Okay, can you hear
No
me?
worries. Yeah, got you.
Yes. The idea here is to focus on your strengths and allow people to focus on their strengths. And so even when you're doing this in a commercial transaction sort of way
Mm-hmm.
with a client, you know, let's say that they fancy their ability to really get aesthetic about the types of properties that they're looking for, whatever.
Yeah.
Let them indulge in that. You help them with maybe the brass tacks. Maybe they're not as strong with the numbers and so on. Maybe that's your area of strength. You can think about this in terms of a client transaction. You can think about this in the context of a team in which you work, right? But the cool thing is that when everybody's doing this, what you find is a very complementary sort of situation. And that's where real power is unleashed.
Yeah. Yeah. What's interesting about that, AJ, just made me think of something. I read a book recently. We've talked about it at length, The 9 Lies About Work, right? And one of the
Yes.
things that, one of the ways that they characterize leadership is that people follow leaders who are spiky, as they describe it, right? You don't have to actually be good at everything. That's a misnomer that you're supposed to be good at everything to be a leader. In fact, some of the leaders that people follow the most aggressively are very spiky. In many ways, sometimes they're terrible human beings, right? As it turns out,
Hmm.
but they're really good at one thing, and that's what people actually follow. Do you agree with that?
100%. I think that, almost all of the great leaders are spiky, are extremely spiky. And the greatest leaders are the spikiest.
Yeah.
And what they do is they find this little thing that they're exceptional at and they hone that and everybody else concedes the point and says, boy, that thing is useful and powerful and we're going to connect to that, right? But not try to supersede it or
Mm-hmm.
overtake it. And so this creates for great leaders. It also creates for great downfalls because sometimes people
It
take
does.
that too far,
Yeah.
but
Yes.
but yeah, no, I think that's absolutely um, what the greatest leaders
Absolutely.
absolutely do. And
Yeah.
if you look at Steve Jobs and people like that, Bill
He's the
Gates,
classic example of it,
absolutely.
right? Yeah.
I mean, Elon Musk today, like the
Yep.
guy is absolutely crazy and
Yep.
brilliant at the same time.
Right.
So,
Extremely spiky, isn't he?
very spiky.
So, AJ, with that, what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to pull up one of your slides, and I appreciate the whimsy of this deck, and it looks like a comic book, right? So, to play off on
Mm-hmm.
this idea of superpower. So, I'm actually going to pull up your first slide here for everybody, which is your superpower. So, why don't you talk a little bit about your superpower as we kind of get this kicked off?
Absolutely. Just to start it off, I'll read this slide to you so that these are kind of my words and how I think about it. So my superpower is the ability to find creative out of the box solutions. And so when presented with a problem, I could find a solution that most other people can't by erasing the boundaries that most people constrain themselves to. And so that's a long way of saying, that I have found that I've consistently honed the ability to find a solution that may be laying or lying in plain sight, but most people are just looking past because usually when people are trying to solve a problem, they're constrained to a very narrow set of uh, boundaries
Yes.
that they're looking at or assumptions that they think that the problem needs to be solved in, right? And so when you're in those boundaries and those assumptions, the available set of solutions to you is pretty narrow. When you start to remove those assumptions one by one, suddenly the available set of solutions becomes pretty tremendous. I, for whatever reason, have been able to hone that, and that's something that I'm very spiky in terms of being able to solve that problem.
Yeah, classically, right, like the forest through the trees. I mean, you do this better than
Hmm.
anybody that I know, is the ability to pull your head out of the sand, right, that often we get in, to be able to see the bigger picture, which is where those big ideas and solutions come from.
Thank you for saying sand.
I did. So now, what's the opposite of your superpower? It is your kryptonite, right? So let's talk a little
That's
bit
right.
about your kryptonite.
Absolutely. So, my kryptonite, I got to read this and then comment on it, is attention to detail. I focus on the big picture at the expense of the details. They bore me and confuse me, and I get impatient, right? So anybody who knows me understands that this is a huge, huge kryptonite for me, right? Now, one of the things that's interesting about this is that when you understand your strengths, you can accept your weaknesses because it's yin and yang, and naturally to be spiky in one area, to over exceed in one area, comes with a natural and required deficit in another area. It's just natural that that would be the case. So I think it's fantastic when you can understand and acknowledge your weaknesses and be proud of them. I wear my weaknesses, you know, proudly, because the fact of the matter is that they come with requisite strengths, and that's actually what we do at List Reports is we ask people not to just identify their strengths but their weaknesses and be proud of them and publicly disclose them to everybody else so that everybody knows what they're dealing with.
Yeah. And that's, I mean, just as a practical tip, right? That's a really important first step, right? Is as you're, we're going to talk about how you actually find your superpower, but it is an embracing, I think in your case, I could use that word, not just an acknowledgement, embracing of your weaknesses, which really empowers you to be able to double down on your strengths. So I think that's a really critical kind of first step here. So you've got this great slide with this laundry list of things that you're actually not good at. So I'm going to pull this up because this is kind of fun, and this will show everybody just how much you embrace your weaknesses.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, yeah. So I'm pretty much bad at everything else in life. I'm not a good reader or learner or organizer, not handy, not a good conversationalist. I have a moderate ADD, not clinically diagnosed, but I'm pretty sure it's true. I have a pretty poor memory. I can't visualize things, and I'm honestly just getting started. I could go on for hours here, and so I think it's okay. You know, I mean, it may not be okay for everybody in my life who has to deal with the
Right.
consequences of
Speak
that,
for yourself,
but
buddy.
but it's true that those are the things that are true about me. But for me, it comes with being extremely spiky. I index in a few areas really, really high, and that's just the reality of who I am. So I could fight all those things and probably get moderately or modestly better at those things, but they're going to come at a huge expense, which is leading and providing vision for this company and solving really hard problems. Those things wouldn't happen on the same extent or as well if I'm focused on trying to shore up my weaknesses. And lots of times people first start from a practical perspective, like, boy, don't I have to solve my weaknesses to get to point X? And the fact of the matter is that now you already kind of got here. So somehow
Right.
you manage through life. And then point B is that they do it for ego reasons, that they feel like they're lesser than if they don't shore up their weaknesses. And that, you know, whenever you're doing something for an ego reason, it's usually a waste of time.
Yeah, absolutely. So, you know, you've got this slide that says superpowers attract others to you. So let's talk a little bit about that. This is a really important piece of this.
Yeah. So this was this is something I learned from, I believe her name is Sally Hogshead, is the uh, motivational speaker who came up with this concept of fascination. And the idea is when you find that thing that uh, you're really, really good at, there's an allure to it. People are just drawn to that. People are just drawn to anything that is in its natural state. When you see a, like we were referencing a bird earlier, and when you see a bird just sort of naturally fly and it's doing what it is meant to be, there's something beautiful and attractive about that. When you see a cheetah run at full speed, there's something
Mm-hmm.
beautiful and attractive and magnificent about that. It's just this thing that's in its natural state of being. And that's true with human beings too. When you're sort of in your natural state, others are attracted to that. And I've found in my career that the fact that I can be spiky in this way and embrace that has been amazing, because for me, my success in life is all due to the partnerships that I've brought in, the people around me, and they see it. They're like, that's a pretty fascinating skill set you've got. And then what they can do is say, okay, but you know what? You're a disaster at X, Y, and Z, and I'm going to
Mm-hmm.
fill in those holes for you. And they can do it way, way better than I ever could. So what I find is that when people are just sort of naturally embracive of themselves in this way, where they're focusing on their talent and passion, other people just are magnetized by that, and they're drawn in.
And this speaks to the next slide, which is about being authentic with your superpower, but not just your superpower, also your kryptonite.
Yeah, and this is to the point before, right? Like it's it's one thing to say that I'm really great at solving really hard problems, but if I also don't acknowledge that I'm a disaster when it comes to organizational details and focusing on those things, who am I really fooling, right? Like, and if you can't be authentic in that way and understand that about yourself, you're going to be considered egotistical, right?
Mm-hmm.
Because people are going to go, okay, this person's way too full of themselves, and that's going to do the opposite. So while the superpower can draw you in, not an acknowledgement of your requisite weaknesses that come with that will push people away. And
Yeah.
and so you have this push pull thing if you can't sort of fully embrace your weaknesses as well.
Absolutely. And this takes time, right? So I've got this fun little slide up
Hmm.
here with an animated GIF on it. So why don't you
Yes.
speak to what it takes to actually master your superpower?
Yeah, just because you have an inherent talent and passion for something doesn't mean it's cultivated, right? So there's a lot of work that goes into being your best, right? So you're an extremely good golfer, Randy, but if you never
Why, thank you.
practice, well, I guess in your case, for some reason you don't practice and you're still good,
I don't know how that
which
works, but it
which is
does.
terrible. But so that's not a good example. But
Not
for
a good
pretty much
example at all.
anybody else, in the world, you kind of have to practice and hone. And I'm kidding because I know you put a lot of time and energy into it when you were younger.
Yes. Yeah.
But you have to practice and hone your talents in order to actually turn them into something that's mature. And that takes work and that takes energy. And sometimes you don't even want to do that. So for me, what I've decided is that in order to fully leverage my superpower, it requires a broad understanding of the world. And so it's encapsulating lots of frameworks and ideas and thoughts and what's happening in the world and what's happening with the finance system, what's happening with technology and all of these things, what's happening with human psychology, right? Trying to understand as best I can all of these, the tapestry of things that make up our world, and then pulling in together a complete picture of that. So that's where I focus on honing my strengths. When I have focused on these areas where are overly dependent on understanding deep details of things, um, where they understand having a really robust memory, I tend to fall short. I tend to, try it, endeavor it, and then I don't really get anywhere with it. I can't move the needle. So I've found that, this is really learning something that you're naturally good at or passionate about tends to just happen very easily, like rolling something down a hill. And when you're going against that and you're focusing on your weaknesses and trying to improve those, it's like pushing something up a hill. It really feels like that.
Yeah. What's interesting is you've got this slide that says seek environments that can embrace your superpower and accept your kryptonite. And I think one of the things
Yeah.
classically I've talked about, even in terms of our partnership, right, in business over many years now, is like these Venn diagrams that overlap about this
Mm.
much, right? And so it's a mutually beneficial, it's very symbiotic, right? Because I can take certain things off of your plate and vice versa, right? And it's that environment that we've created that's been, I think, so powerful.
Yes. And I think this is so applicable to all of the agentpreneurs out there, right? There's not one way to run a successful real estate operation or practice, right? There's many, many ways to do it. And so if you're taking the guidebook from somebody who is like, this is the way to do it because I was successful this way, you're really playing into their strengths and where they had their superpowers and then they played them out. You know, it's, it would be fascinating to learn, basketball from LeBron James or Michael Jordan or something like that, right? But the fact of the matter is that how they learned with their natural talents and passions and what will make you successful are probably very different, right? Because your deficits in terms of where your skill sets and your talents are, you start from a very different place, right? And
Yeah.
so I want people to think about that because when they say, okay, last week we had a friend of ours, Matt Clements, on who is really like, here's the formula, 5 4 3 2 1, right? And
Mm-hmm.
this is how you do it. And you know what? But here's the thing with Matt Clements, that when I heard him talk about his strategy last week, I was like, this completely embodies this guy. Like
Yeah.
this is everything that makes sense for him.
It's like a bird
He's
flying,
going to
right?
make right, exactly. He's going to make the calls. He's going to be social, and then he's going to set up his life so he can go surf at 3 p.m. Right? That works for him, and really applies to his superpower. So, I think it's great advice what he provided. But the question is, if you knew what your superpowers were, could you retrofit that strategy to work for you? And
So
that's the
AJ,
question, right?
that's the key though, right? So if I'm being honest here, for much of my earlier life, I sort of I didn't really read a lot of books from leaders. I didn't really seek the advice of coaches and things like that. And so coaching is obviously a big thing in the real estate industry. So just talk a little bit more about where that balance is, because even you, right, you're learning from other people that are out there, but I think what you're saying
Mhm.
is that you're adapting those learnings to something that works for you. And I just think that's a really important point I want you to double down on.
Yeah, I think the classic example is everybody who hasn't been told at some point in their life that if they want to be successful, they have to go network, right? I have to be a networker. I have to go out and party and go to these conferences and meet people and do these things. Certainly in our career, I've been given that advice 100 times or more, right? And the fact of the matter is I'm a terrible networker. Like I'm the last person who I want to go out and meet people and try to intervene myself into someone's conversation and do those things. And and that advice is just never going to apply to me in a way that I can be good at it. Because here's the fact of the matter. If networking is what it takes to be successful, there are better networkers out there, and they're going to take the best opportunities before I have those opportunities. They're at the same events to go network with people. If
Right.
they're better networkers, they're going to out network me, right? So, from a competitive perspective, it's never going to work that if that's not your natural personality, that's not what you're great at, that's going to be something that is going to be your way to thrive and succeed. But here's the point. Take the idea of networking and say, okay, what they're really saying is I've got to find a way to collide with people on a regular basis. Okay, well, maybe my way to do that is to send out 20 emails a day, handcrafted or handwritten notes, where maybe that's more representative of my personality. Maybe I can be deeply thoughtful about those notes, and that's more my personality. That's fine. It's going to still have the same effect, because at the end of the day, the point of the networking is to just randomly run into people and hopefully create your sphere of influence, right? So it's really about taking that advice, applying, looking at your superpowers, and seeing how you can get the best out of that.
Right. It's about the essence of it, right? It isn't
Hmm.
about going to a party. It's about increasing the odds of a relationship through increasing the number of collisions, as you said, which is absolutely
That's right.
true. But there are other ways to do that. I just have to share here. I can count on probably one finger the number of times AJ and I went somewhere to network, and he actually had business cards. Oftentimes, I'd write his name on my business card and scratch out my name.
It's
That
true.
happened all the time.
I've had you carry my business cards for me. I've had other people do it too.
Yeah.
Yeah,
To the point where
it's
you turn
pretty
to me, you're like,
embarrassing.
"Hey, man, where's my business cards?" I'm like, "Dude, I don't have your business cards, man." So, AJ, let's bring
Yeah.
this home a little bit, and let's talk
Okay.
about, well, how does somebody actually find their superpower? So, what do they do?
Yeah.
You've got this great little grid. So, why don't you talk about that?
Yeah. So this looks like some form of tic tac toe or something, but the basic idea is, um, you I believe that where your superpower exists is where your passion and your talent intersect. And so, what does that mean? Well, there are things that some of us are naturally talented at, but we actually don't have some sort of underlying passion. In other words, I may be good at golf, like Randy. I mean, you're good at golf, but to be a pro golfer takes a lot of passion, right? Like you're gonna have to be out there
Absolutely.
every day for many hours a day, right? And so you have the talent, but do you have the passion? Maybe you do, maybe you don't, right? On the other hand, there are a lot of people, and golf is a good example of this, where they're very passionate about golf, but they have no talent.
Right.
You're looking at them right here. Okay, I
I've
should have
tried,
put
man.
that
I've
on the
tried.
list too. I should have put that on the list too. Um, but yeah, so you can have a lot of passion about something, but not be very talented about it. Where I think the superpower really ignites is where your passion and your talent come together. That's because, to have some sort of natural God given talent is great. but then you got to drive that as hard as you can, many, many, many hours a day. And that's where the passion fuels you and really, really lights this thing on fire, right? So if you have passion but no talent, or talent no passion, or no passion no talent, I'd encourage you to avoid those areas in particular.
No, that's great. So I'm going to go to the next slide here, right? Which is, but I still don't know what my superpower is. This is not an
Mm-hmm.
easy thing to do, is it? You don't just look at a
Mm-hmm.
slide like that and magically like, oh my gosh, I got it. I know what my superpower is.
Yeah, I think the truth is, the spikier you are, the more it just sort of comes natural to you in terms of what your superpower is. But some superpowers are pretty esoteric. Uh, if you don't mind, real quick, Randy, just tell them what your superpower is.
Yeah, absolutely. My superpower is what I loosely call 0 to 1, right? I'm really good when there's sort of nothing and we have to bring it to some formation. And I pull on a broad base of learnings and understandings. As AJ will tell you, I love everything. So whether it's
Hmm.
cooking or it's design, or it's just a very broad base to pull from in very different ways, but more in a tactical to take an idea or kernel of an idea and bring it to life in some form. Whereas my kryptonite is the routine, the pedantic, right? The incremental, what I sometimes call the 1 to 1.1 is not my strength at all.
That's right. That's right. And so the reason I bring that up is, it's not like you woke up one day and you're like, "Oh, that's my superpower." That's
Right.
that's a that is your superpower. I can absolutely attest to it, having been your partner now for a
A
long
long
time and
time.
your friend for even longer.
Yeah,
But that's not something you would have just known, right?
that's
That is
correct.
something that you actually had to sit down and think about from many, many different perspectives and angles. So it's introspective. It's asking other people. I remember having this conversation with you where you asked me this. What is my superpower? How do you
Yeah.
think about it? But you're looking at things like, what would you say? You ask your friends and coworkers and family and bosses and direct reports. What would they say your natural talents are?
Yeah.
What do you nerd out on or get strangely excited about, right? And sometimes you don't even notice these things about yourself, but you'll talk to several of your friends or family, and they'll know exactly what it is, and there will be some remarkable unity in their answers. So you're like, wow, you all think that?
Yeah.
Why did nobody ever tell me?
But you see
What
those
would
themes, right? And that's such an important part of it, is stepping outside of yourself by talking to people who are around you, who know you well, who are on your team, whatever. I did this with you.
That's
I
right.
did this with employees, with friends,
Mhm.
right? And that answer starts to become more clear.
Absolutely, absolutely. And so, another good question to ask is, what would they turn to you for help on, right?
Right.
So, in what areas, because that gets to the heart of a superpower oftentimes, is like, you know, uh, if they know that you're a really good problem solver, when they have problems of a certain nature, they're going to come and pick up the phone and call you, right? And so they'll be happy to approach that with you at that time. So
Yeah.
those are some questions you can ask, people and then the other thing that we say is, how do you approach problems, right? What is your approach to problems in general? There's a certain consistency in terms of how you probably approach that, and that is probably a hint as to where your superpower lay. And then the last question we say is, what's been consistent about your personality since you were a teenager or younger, right? Like, this is a formative time of development for you. And it's probably the case that some of these passions and talents, though they may have manifested in different ways, run deep, right? And so you want to see where those connection points are, and see if you can find them for yourself.
That's actually a really interesting one, I think, right? What you're suggesting there is that the essence of the superpower is likely something that's been with us for a long time, right? And this resonates with me.
Hmm.
I look back to the things that I was either good at or people told me I was good at when I was much younger. And that's not different at all from sort of where I landed today. So it's just an
Right.
interesting thing, though, as much as we change and our circumstances change, that there's something about who we are, even from a young age, that you can look at as you try to identify your superpowers.
Absolutely, absolutely. And by the way, I get this question a lot. Oh, can I have multiple superpowers?
Right.
Well, congratulations. Yeah, I think you can, but I think that the thing is that, part of this process of identifying your superpower is figuring out where you're going to spend your time and energy, right? And so to say that you have multiple superpowers is also to say that you're going to split your focus across an ever increasing number of things. So, I would try to find the thing that is most practically available to you that
Hmm.
also intersects between your passions and your talents there.
Yeah, no, I think that's great. Okay, great. So, how does someone find their kryptonite?
Yeah, yeah. So I think there's something, I provide you guys a laundry list of the things that I'm bad at, but those aren't necessarily my kryptonites. The kryptonite is the thing that you're bad at because of your superpower, because of the thing that you're good at. So as you over index in one area, you naturally under index in another area. So it's kind of the opposite of your superpower in a certain way. And so it's not to say because I'm a creative out of the box problem solver, the exact opposite of that is my kryptonite. It's, well, why are details the problem? It's because I'm thinking in terms of frameworks
Hmm.
all the time, and that's how I solve problems. So when I'm out of the mindset of thinking about frameworks is when I'm really weak, and that's usually when I'm getting mired in the details of something, right? And so that's where the yin and the yang are for me, in particular. And so I think when you're thinking about your kryptonite, it's the thing that is a kryptonite as a result of your superpower, specifically.
Yeah.
So I'm very good at X. I must be very poor at Y as a result of that.
Right, right. It's two sides of a coin, right? Like it must be true that I'm bad at Y because I'm good at X. That's when you know you've honed in on your superpower, right? Because it's a
That's right.
logical sort of byproduct of it.
And what is yours? What did you identify as your kryptonite?
My kryptonite is the 1 to 1.1, right?
Hmm.
Which almost necessarily you're bad at if you're good at the 0 to 1, at least the way I look at it.
Yeah. So explain that to our agentpreneurs, because I don't think that they'll necessarily know what the 1 to 1.1 is.
Yeah, so at least in terms of us as a technology company and building products, right? Just give a basic example. Maybe AJ and I are talking on the weekend about some idea, and he's sort of divined the forest through the trees, which is his superpower, and I can sort of take that from just the formative stages of an idea, the 0 in this case we're calling it, and bring it to some stage of life and conceptualize it in a way that frankly he can't, in the same way that
Hmm.
I likely couldn't have come up with the idea in the first place. And that is the 0 to 1, to bring form to it so that we can bring a product, in this case, to all of you out there. But that's very different and distinct from the maintenance of that and taking the learnings from the 0 to 1 and creating the 1.1. This is a nod to versioning for those of you who've ever
Hmm.
installed a new version of software, right? So I'm not good at that. My mind lives in the 0 to 1, and so I necessarily can't live in, and I'm not frankly very good at the 1 to 1.1 to 1.2 and so on and so forth.
Hmm. Right. And so I would say a lot of our agentpreneurs probably are good at some of that stuff, right? Like that maybe a lot of agentpreneurs, in this part of their lives, they're not really focused on inventing new things. What they
Mm-hmm.
want is a playbook that they can follow, and maybe innovate on in their own particular way. And what I think we're saying here to all of them is take the playbook and then figure out where your superpowers are, and then
Yes.
try to find out how those two things converge, right? Take the playbook, apply it to your superpowers, avoid your weaknesses, and see where they converge.
Absolutely. We're
Mhm.
gonna wrap this up here. I've got
Yeah.
a great quote, AJ, that you shared from Martin Seligman, a famous psychologist, said, "The good life consists in deriving happiness by using your signature strengths every day in the main realms of living. The meaningful life adds one more component." So again, the meaningful life, using these same strengths to forward knowledge, power, or goodness. So AJ, why don't you speak to that a little bit and sort of why you included that and why that resonates with you so much?
Yeah, I think, just like in the superhero movies, right? We want to use our superpowers for good, right?
Yes.
When people start to discover what they are for themselves, they can use these for good purposes or for bad purposes. And I think the point is that number one, when you're living your superpowers, you're living a meaningful life, probably. But with great power comes great responsibility, or whatever that quote is, right? Like
Yeah.
we want to make sure that people are figuring out how to use these not to manipulate others or make situations worse, but really amplify the world and make things better. And so it's just what we always talk about is be good, right? When you discover your strengths and powers, be good, do good as a result of that.
Oh, well said, well said. And I'll add one more thing just as we make this sort of actionable for everybody. So for those of you who are listening, right, obviously we're encouraging you to go through the process, take the time to find your superpower, identify your kryptonite, embrace that. But further, and we've done this across the company, where we've had everybody in the company identify their superpowers, right, and their kryptonites, and we put them on full display. And it's an interesting process where you see somebody go through this transformation of deeply embracing, what they're kind of meant to be and where they're going to find the most satisfaction and fulfillment, ultimately success. And so we actually have slide decks with superpowers and kryptonites of everybody in the company. And there's some great resources. So we will post this presentation and we'll post some links to things like 16 Personalities, which is a great free test. AJ, do you want to talk for a second about Strengths Finders? That's a really good resource
Yeah.
as well.
I thought Strengths Finders is pretty great. It's
Yeah.
Strengths Finders 2.0. You can Google it. It's a book, but it comes with a test, and it's like $12.
Yeah.
And it's a pretty good test. It takes, I want to say it takes about 20 minutes. And then what you get is a very comprehensive report about how, based on your psychology, where your strengths are and maybe where your weaknesses lay as well. And so that's a way if you're sort of scrounging for, geez, I can't introspect in a way where I can assess this. Maybe you can use some of the tools like StrengthsFinder to do that.
Yeah, that's great. And reach out to us if you have questions. We're happy to help. If you've identified your superpower, we would absolutely love to hear it. AJ, thank you so much for your time. I love this topic. It's kind of become our thing, and you've really spearheaded this. And so, why don't you say goodbye to our agentpreneurs for today? And I'm sure they're going to see you real soon.
Always my pleasure, my honor. Thanks so much, guys. Take care.
All right. Thanks, AJ. Appreciate that. This is such an important topic, right? Again, we've talked about how this is a unique time when hopefully we have a little bit more time to eat well and exercise and build new habits. And this is a great use of time, spending time deeply understanding what your superpower is, embracing it, doubling down on it, identifying your kryptonite, embracing that as well. And then for those of you who have teams of people around you, please go through this exercise with them as well. I can't tell you how helpful it's been, and frankly how empowering it is when somebody says, I understand what I'm good at, and I don't have to be good at the bad things. I can really double down on the good things, and I can surround myself with people who can shore up my kryptonites or my weaknesses, and that's what we've tried to do here at the company. So tremendous advice. I hope all of you go and do this, and please share your superpowers with us. We would absolutely love to hear that. So with that, we're going to wrap up the show. Again, just a reminder, tomorrow we've got Simon Chen on. Simon, again, was the CEO of ERA, the whole franchise. He's now a senior executive at Realogy as EVP of Product Innovation. We're going to talk about high-quality lead generation and the role of technology and sort of what he's seeing from his vantage point. And we've got a great lineup for the rest of the week. So with that, we're going to sign off. Thank you so much, and we'll look forward to seeing you tomorrow. Bye.